My greatest guess is river otter.
Yeah, as long as everybody.
Hi, Sterling.
Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Got a full room, that's awesome. I'm going to give it just a couple minutes for see if we have any stragglers, but I'll make a few announcements while we wait. Coming up in just very shortly on March 27th, we will have Assembly and Petition, the third of our three community First Amendment workshops in partnership with James Madison's Montpelier. That will take place here, probably that exact same room. We try to keep that to a little bit smaller crowd so it can be more interactive, so make sure you sign up for that soon. Wednesday, April 9th, 6 p.m. At Jefferson Madison Regional Library in the Swanson Room, we will finally hear the full report of what the archaeologists found when they dug up the Swan Tavern site around Quarter Square. That should be very exciting. And as we get into the pretty months, we're going to be doing lots of walking tours. We're going to have two Jewish history walking tours. That'll be April 27th and May 28th. And we'll be doing the Secret Seawall tour on June 24th and the Downtown Mall tour on June 28th. So make sure you stay tuned and sign up for those as well. We also got a whole bunch of other exciting things coming up this summer. We hope to do a singing class based on shape note songbooks that are still being produced out of the Shenandoah Valley. Long tradition there. That'll be something completely new we're trying out. It should be exciting. So come join us for that. Okay. All right. Before we get started, I'd like to invite the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society President, Phyllis Leffer, to come up and say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Like that. Call and response. Terrific. It's so nice to see so many people out on such a beautiful evening. I will be short and sweet. Here we are in March, and we have kind of a wonderful set of programs that we try to bring you on a regular basis. I think the number of people who are showing up for our programs is a real testament for the growth of this organization. We are getting better and better known in the community. Of course, we bring you well-known local speakers, like our speaker tonight, with Britton, who's obviously a big draw, but the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society is also, I think, garnering the attention as a community in new ways. And I only want to say that the work that we do here and these programs that we bring you pretty much on a monthly basis, or sometimes more than once a month, we bring you free of charge, and we welcome you to join us for these programs. But while they are free of charge, I just need to remind you that they are not free of cost. And I know you all know that. So I really want to encourage you to help us continue to do the real quality work that we do for the community. You have these bulletins that we put out 4 times a year. They're over there. There are brochures. There are envelopes. Please take one with you if you're so inclined. Please help us with an extra donation. And if you are not a member, I really encourage you to become one. You'll learn a lot more about the work that goes on, and you'll help support us going forward. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. Okay. Good evening again. I'm Sterling Howell with the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. And as always, we are very appreciative of the good people here at the Center of Belvedere for letting us come into their wonderful facilities and put on very interesting talks for you. Tonight, we are very, very fortunate to be joined by award-winning journalist and historian, Britton. Rick specializes in 18th and 19th century Virginia history, and his main areas of expertise are the history of central Piedmont, the American Civil War, and the life and times of Thomas Jefferson. With over 200 published articles and essays under his belt, Rick also conducts tours of Charlottesville and Civil War battlefields. He teaches Virginia history classes, illustrates maps for history books, websites, and museum exhibits, and lectures frequently on a wide range of Virginia history topics. Rick, thank you very much for sharing with us tonight, and the history is yours.
Wow, this is a good-sized crowd. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I printed this out really large, so I'm going to try to read it without my glasses. But the first time I make a mistake, the glasses are coming out. While a number of enslaved African Americans looked on, 40-year-old Thomas Jefferson, shovel in hand, began poking into the side of the large Indian mound. Spherical in shape and 40 feet in diameter, it sat on the floodplain of the gently flowing Rivanna River, 6 miles north of Monticello, his mountaintop home. Jefferson was standing in the ditch surrounding the barrow, as he called it, when he commenced. I first dug superficially in several parts of it, he wrote, and came to collections of human bones at different depths, from 6 inches to 3 feet below the surface. These were lying in the utmost confusion. Americans can usually rattle off a few of Thomas Jefferson's titles and achievements. I love telling people that there's probably at least 100. The principal author of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson, as our third president, was the driving force behind the Louisiana Purchase and the wildly successful Meriwether Lewis and William Clark expedition. And, of course, he was the founder, the father of the University of Virginia. But he was much, much more. Jefferson was a true Renaissance man, a brilliant polymath with an eclectic and dizzying array of interests. Of these, he called science his passion, and over the course of his busy lifetime, despite devoting over 30 years to public service, Jefferson made contributions to botany, paleontology, meteorology, entomology, ethnology, and comparative anatomy, just to name a few. He was also an amateur archaeologist, and in 1783, spurred on by a document sent him by the French government, Thomas Jefferson excavated a Monacan Indian burial mound. It was one of his greatest scientific achievements. In applying his innate sense of order and detail, wrote science historian Silvio A. Bedini, Jefferson anticipated modern archaeology's basis and methods by almost a full century. The excavation was also a shocking desecration of an obviously sacred site. Born on April 13, 1743 at Shadwell, his father's plantation in Virginia Piedmont, the western edge of European settlement, Thomas Jefferson studied in private schools before his 1760 enrollment at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg. There, as he later noted in his autobiography, it was his great good fortune to study under and befriend Dr. William Small, a disciple of the Scottish Enlightenment. In his warm tribute, Jefferson wrote that Dr. Small probably fixed the destinies of his life. That's an amazing tribute for a teacher, isn't it? From his conversation, Jefferson continued, I got my first views of the expansion of science and of the systems of things in which we are placed. It was in Williamsburg, too, that young Jefferson had an encounter that helped foster his fascination with Native Americans. In the spring of 1762, a party of 165 Cherokee from the Holston River Valley in today's eastern Tennessee accompanied their chief to Williamsburg prior to his journey across the Big Water to London. Called Alta City and cleverly nicknamed Alta City, by the colonists, this chieftain delivered a stirring farewell oration the evening before he departed. Enthralled, Jefferson looked on from the edge of out-of-city's camp. The moon was in full splendor, he later wrote, and to her he seemed to address himself. His sounding voice, distinct articulation, animated action, and the solemn silence of his people filled me with awe and veneration, although I did not understand a single word he uttered. After college, Jefferson practiced law for 7 years. Then, following service in the Virginia House of Burgesses, the Continental Congress, and the Virginia House of Delegates, he was elected governor of the Old Dominion in 1779 during the American Revolution. Re-elected in 1780, Jefferson, in October of that year, received a fascinating set of queries, in essence, a questionnaire, from the Secretary of the French Legation to the United States, Francois Marquis de Barbé-Marbois, who later played a large role in negotiating the Louisiana Purchase. Totaling 22, the queries sought out some of the basic statistical information on the American states then warring against France's common enemy. Numerous copies had been sent to Congress. The Virginia facsimile had been forwarded to Jefferson by a member of the state's congressional delegation. Query number 3, for example, asked for an exact description of the state's limits and boundaries, while 7 inquired about the number of its inhabitants. Others sought out details on the state's religions, rivers, mountains, flora, seaports, colleges, commercial productions, and military force, as well as customs and manners. An inveterate compiler of data, Jefferson was well prepared to respond. As he later noted in his autobiography, I had always made it a practice, whenever an opportunity occurred, of obtaining any information on our country, meaning Virginia. When Jefferson says our country, he means Virginia, which might be of use to me in any station, public or private, to commit it to writing. These memoranda were on loose papers. I thought this a good occasion to embody their substance, which I did in the order of Mr. Marbois' queries, so as to answer his wish and to arrange them for my own use. Although burdened with the responsibilities of his governorship, Jefferson began working on his reply immediately. Unfortunately, the declining state of military affairs in Virginia for Jefferson's last 7 months as governor meant he had to set aside the project that had so sparked his enthusiasm. During this tumultuous time, he was forced to flee twice from Richmond, the new state capital he'd established, and after Jefferson and the legislature relocated to Charlottesville to escape the British, he was compelled to even abandon Monticello when a British raiding party rode up the little mountain and captured his neoclassical home. Although Jefferson later termed this troubling period the very nadir of his public career, the termination of his governorship in early June 1781 nonetheless gave him the time he needed to focus on the French questionnaire. Organizationally, each query became the topic of a chapter. The first version was sent to Marbois in December 1781, but Jefferson immediately began enlarging the manuscript, indeed tripling the length, until it was published in Paris in 1785 during his time there as American minister, and 2 years later in London by John Stockdale, entitled Notes on the State of Virginia. Most of the information came from Jefferson's personal papers, his large library at Monticello, and his numerous learned correspondence. One query, however, animated him to travel afield. This was number 22, which asked for a description of the Indians established in the state and an indication of the Indian monuments discovered in that state. After writing about Virginia's upwards of 40 different tribes and compiling a table of their numbers, confederacies, and geographical situation, Jefferson loved charts and tables. He's always compiling charts and tables. The former governor tackled the query's second section. I know of no such thing existing as an Indian monument, he wrote, unless indeed it be the barrows, of which many are to be found all over this country. Jefferson penned that these were of considerable notoriety among the Indians, and that one stood in his neighborhood. He recalled that in the mid-1750s, a party of Native Americans went through the woods directly to it, and having stayed about it some time, with expressions which were construed to be those of sorrow, they returned to the high road about 6 miles distant. While some writers, many writers indeed, claim that young Jefferson, then only 10 to 12 years old, witnessed this incident himself, it seems much more likely he's heard this story secondhand. Excuse me. Getting kind of dry. Come on in, have a seat. This is going on your permanent record. These Native Americans were most certainly Monacans, a Siouan-speaking people whose ancestors in the dim past had journeyed from the Ohio River Valley across the Appalachian Mountains. Some sources claim these early Sioux were driven over the mountains by enemies further to the north. Perhaps they made the trek in search of better game. Up through the late 1600s, the Monacan Nation, a confederacy of like-speaking Native American tribes, controlled a vast region of the fertile Virginia Piedmont, including the valleys of the Rivanna and Upper James rivers. By the time of the arrival of the Europeans in the Piedmont in the 1720s, the Monacan had long since removed to the southwest of Virginia. And I just want to say a couple of things off the cuff here. There's actually a controversy about this. I believe that they had been removed. The Monacan people, however, tell us that they always remained here, and that once they had abandoned their large villages, and I'll talk about one in just a moment, that once they had abandoned their large villages, they were then kind of dissipated into smaller villages. Now, that's what the Monacan people say. The problem that I have with that is if they were still here in smaller villages, why don't we have a lot of accounts of whites encountering those smaller villages? And we just don't. And so it's kind of interesting. The Monacan civilization was a simple one. Because they maintained no herds, their hunters ranged over a wide area in search of meat, stalking elk, deer, and small game through the open woods. Bears were also killed for meat after they'd fattened up for their winter sleep. The grease was used as lard and as a base for the paints with which they decorated themselves. And I'm going to leave you for a moment so you can imagine what that must have smelled like. When the nearby wildlife was depleted, the Monacan huntsmen often pursued bison over the beautiful Blue Ridge into the great valley beyond. Painted, dressed in animal skins, and sporting wildly cut manes, they adorned themselves with necklaces made of copper that they'd mined. Much prized, the copper they sometimes traded with the Powhatan, an Algonquin people who occupied Tidewater, Virginia, to the east. Separated approximately along the fall line, and separated by the differing languages they spoke, the Monacan and the Powhatan also frequently fought. The Monacan women raised crops of corn, beans, and squash in the fields surrounding their villages, often comprising scores of bark-covered, domed structures. These villages were surrounded by 7-foot-high palisade enclosures, a feature that made them resemble the English-built forts. One such town, Monacan had once stood near the Rivanna River in close proximity to the barrow in Jefferson's neighborhood. He noted the connection between the two sites when he wrote that the mound was located opposite to some hills on which had been an Indian town. To better answer Marbois' query and to satisfy his own curiosity, Jefferson determined to open and examine this mound thoroughly. Prior to the excavation, however, in anticipation of what was later termed the scientific method, he posited questions he hoped to find answers for in the earth. It was obviously a repository of the dead, but when was it constructed? How was it constructed? Was it true that those interred were the casualties of Native American battles fought nearby? Was it the common sepulcher or tomb of just one town? This supposition came from a tradition, Jefferson wrote, handed down from the Aboriginal Indians, that when they settled in a town, the first person who died was placed erect and earth put around him so as to cover and support him. When another person died, the dirt was removed, he was reclined against the first, and then the earth was replaced. In this manner, therefore, a burial mound would grow outward from the center. Another question, inferred but never stated exactly, was this. Rather than being related to just one Indian village, was this barrow a sacred burial place for an entire section of the Monacan nation? Interestingly, a theory at the time, popular among members of the nation's foremost scientific organization, the American Philosophical Society, which Jefferson had been elected to in 1780, claimed that Native Americans were too primitive to have erected the barrow, also called tumuli, which had been encountered in numerous American states. Too primitive. Instead, they attributed their construction to a much earlier people, descended from either, get this folks, remember this is the theory at the time, descended either from Phoenicians, Israelites, a lost tribe, right? And I saved the best for last. The best for last. Or perhaps even Scandinavians. Think Vikings. Vikings. These ancient mound builders, the American philosophicals theorized, were subsequently driven away by the barbarous ancestors of the Native Americans they were all familiar with. Some of the mound builders journeyed south, they theorized, and founded the Aztec civilization. While Jefferson was certainly familiar with this racist hypothesis, it's not known if he was considering it as he began his dig. Unfortunately, too, the exact date of the excavation is not known. Concerning this important detail, and so uncharacteristic of Thomas Jefferson, who was normally minutia obsessed, his notes on the state of Virginia is silent. Historian Douglas I. Wilson, however, who studied the original manuscript at the Massachusetts Historical Society, the setting copy for the 1785 Paris edition, has concluded that the dig must have been performed after the summer or early fall of 1783 and before Jefferson left for Philadelphia on 16 October. The circular barrow was large, 40 feet in diameter, encircled by a ditch 5 feet across and 5 feet deep. It had been 12 feet high, Jefferson observed, though now reduced by the plow to 7.5, having been under cultivation about a dozen years. Prior to that, he wrote, it had been covered with a small stand of trees 1 foot in diameter. Jefferson's poking around quickly established that the mound contained human bones. They were lying in disarray, some vertical, some oblique, some horizontal. They were entangled and held together in clusters by the earth. Bones of the most distant parts were found together, as for instance, the small bones of the foot in the hollow of a skull, to give the idea of bones emptied promiscuously from a bag or a basket. These were secondary burial features, wrote UVA anthropology professor Jeffrey L. Hantman. The commingled remains of numerous individuals who'd been initially buried elsewhere, then moved collectively at designated ritual moments. Jefferson marveled at the number of remains he uncovered, the vast majority, of course, being skulls, jawbones, teeth, and the bones of arms, legs, feet, and hands. Some he extracted intact, but others, such as the skull of an infant, fell to pieces on being taken out of the mound. Next began the most commented upon aspect of Jefferson's archaeological endeavor. I proceeded then, he wrote, to make a perpendicular cut through the body of the barrow, that I might examine its internal structure. This was opened to the former surface of the earth and was wide enough for a man to walk through and examine its sides. Typical of Jefferson's writings, if you read his Garden Memorandum or other memorandum books, this passage disguises the fact that he alone could not possibly have performed this labor. Surely, the perpendicular cut was dug by a rather large number of enslaved African Americans, perhaps as many as 30 or 40, who he had either transported from Monticello or leased from a nearby plantation owner. Now the amateur archaeologist was able to determine how the barrow was constructed. At the bottom, that is, on the level of the circumjacent plain, he wrote, I found bones. Above these, a few stones brought from a cliff a quarter of a mile away. Then an interval of earth, then a stratum of bones, and so on. At one end of the trench, he found 4 strata of bones. At the other, 3. The bones in the strata closest to the surface were the least decayed. Down through the ages, therefore, the barrow had grown taller with recurring layers of bones, stones, and earth. Bones, stones, and earth. Next, he was able to determine whether any of those interred had fallen in battle. Of the bones he pulled from the mound's various strata, no holes were discovered in any of them, as if made with bullets, arrows, or other weapons. What are the other questions? Well, naturally, Jefferson wasn't able to determine when the burial mound was initiated, but thanks to his methods, he was able to answer 2 other questions. For the following reasons, he wrote, it was obviously not one town's common sepulcher. For these reasons. 1, the number of skeletons it contained, he conjectured, was 1,000, a large number, 1,000 people in this mound. 2, none of them were upright. The bones lay in different strata with no intermixing. And 3, the different states of decay in these strata seem to indicate a difference in the time of inhumation. This burial mound, therefore, must have appertained to a fairly large region of the Monacan nation. Appearances certainly indicate, he wrote, that it has derived both origin and growth from the customary collection of bones and deposition of them together. In the balance of his response to the Aborigine-related query, Jefferson briefly mentioned 2 other barrows, one of which also contained human remains, and presciently noted, and I find this amazing, and I'm still amazed, I've known this for years and years, and I'm still amazed by this. He noted, this is a direct quote, folks, the resemblance between the Indians of America and the eastern inhabitants of Asia. And he urged the collection of Native American vocabularies so that those skilled in languages could construct the best evidence of the derivation of this part of the human race. He concluded with a 7-page table. Remember, he loves charts and tables. 7-page table listing the tribes residing within and adjacent to the United States, their names, approximate numbers, and the locations of their tribal lands. Ambitious in scope, Notes on the State of Virginia with its double entendre title won for Jefferson considerable notoriety. In 1785, the year of its French publication, Secretary of the Continental Congress Charles Thomson, a fellow member of the American Philosophical Society, called it a most excellent natural history, not merely of Virginia, but of North America, and possibly equal, if not superior, to that of any country yet published. The Notes on Virginia is probably the most important scientific and political book written by an American before 1785, wrote English professor William Pedden, who edited the 1954 edition of the work. So in other words, both of these guys are connected to Jefferson one way or another with these laudatory remarks. Upon it, much of Jefferson's contemporary fame as a philosopher was based. And no small amount of that fame was due to the Sage of Monticello's archaeological dig, the only such of his lifetime. Unfortunately, other than what was published in Notes on the State of Virginia, there's no other information about the Monacan burial mound. Jefferson left no field notes. Its exact location has never been pinpointed, although many individuals have tried, including Professor Hantman and a team of anthropology students from the University of Virginia. Unfortunate, too, is the fact that Jefferson never mentioned refilling the trench. If it was indeed left open, the examined remains strewn across the ground, the Rivanna River, which frequently inundates the plain upon which the mound stood, would have washed it away within a few decades. Jefferson obviously believed that the benefits of scientific inquiry greatly trumped the barrow's importance to the Monacan people. That being said, the dig was a major scientific achievement. The importance of Jefferson's experience and his report of it cannot be overstressed, wrote science historian Bedini, for he introduced for the very first time the principle of stratigraphy in archaeological excavation. With this discipline, examining the layers, strata, Jefferson called them, provides a calendar for determining the age of items or human remains contained therein. In his description, Jefferson not only indicated the basic features of the stratigraphic method, but also virtually named it, although 100 years were to pass before the term became established in archaeological jargon. Most important is the fact that thanks to his excavation of the Monacan Indian burial mound and the detailed account of his posited questions and scientific methodology, Thomas Jefferson became known as the father of American archaeology. Thank you. Do you have time for? Okay, I think Sterling is telling me we have some time. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to go back to the beginning of your lecture. What was the purpose of the French questionnaire for the French?
The purpose of the French, the mindset of the American king. She's asking what was the purpose of the French questionnaire. It's during the American Revolution. The mindset of the French king was, well, all of these independent states are fighting our common enemy. We should probably learn something about them. Yeah.
Think of your talk. Was there, given that there were Monacan nations nearby, were there ever any attempt?
No, there's only one Monacan nation. There's plenty of tribes, other tribes that are a part of this nation, but there's just one nation.
Okay, but what, let's just say a community of them nearby, was there any attempt to contact them prior to the digging at all? Or
Oh, no.
Try to create a relationship?
Oh, no. It had been years since anybody in Jefferson's immediate circle had encountered the Monacan people. That's why I made that statement earlier about how it's controversial. The Monacan people tell us that they've always been here. Honestly, I seriously doubt that that's true.
Because that's
Right.
what I thought. That they had.
Well, that's what they say. They do. I would like to talk with them about it. I'd like to hear more about exactly how they say, and if they can back up what they say.
And just as a follow-up, I mean, given, you had used the word desecration, was there anything in his writings of remorse or regret about?
No remorse, no regret. No remorse, no regret from Thomas Jefferson. And maybe I should mention this, but, and it's not a nice thing, but if you read Notes on the State of Virginia, it's obvious that Jefferson does not believe that Native Americans are equal to white people. And it's also obvious that he does not believe that African Americans are equal to white people. He just did not believe that. Of course, he wasn't alone, but I'm talking about Jefferson right now. In fact, that point of view was fairly common, but yeah. Yes, sir.
Has a LiDAR survey been conducted on that field along the Rivanna?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Professor Hantman has searched for it.
Can you repeat the questions?
Yeah, sorry. He's asking if it's been located, if field work has been done along the Rivanna, and yes, they have. So either they have never been able to pinpoint it exactly, or there is another distinct possibility, and that is they found where it was, but they don't want to reveal because other people might go in and dig. But remember, the mound was above the surface of the ground, and Jefferson had the enslaved African Americans dig that trench all the way down to the surface of the ground. So in other words, it was open. Yeah. Yes?
Were there lots of other mounds besides this one?
Were there lots of other mounds besides this one? Yeah, I mentioned that in Notes on the State of Virginia, he talks about two. And in fact, one was on the peak of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and another one that he described actually had some human remains. There were other mounds in the Shenandoah Valley as well. But he mentions two others that he was aware of.
Isn't there one at the confluence of the Rivanna and like down near Scottsville?
At Russell.
Yeah, Rossaway.
Rassawek, okay.
That was also a huge.
Yeah, no. She's asking about, wasn't there a mound at Rassawek? Rassawek was at the Point of Fork. And a lot of people believe that actually Rassawek was the capital of the Monacan Indian Nation. And it's where the Rivanna comes into the James River. It's the confluence. It's not Scottsville, it's the town of Columbia there. If the town of Columbia even exists anymore. Has anybody been to Columbia? I haven't been there in 20 years. Is it still there? Because it was mostly abandoned the last time I saw it. Other questions? I know there were other questions. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I'm of Scandinavian descent, and I deeply resent your earlier
He's an old buddy of mine, and he's famous for joking around. So thank you, Mr. Rumler. Yes.
Is it possible that the town of the present supposed location of the town of
Montasuka Canal.
Did I pronounce that?
No. I'm assuming that I know how to pronounce it. I'm assuming.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, and I'm following you. Is
Yeah.
it possible that that's not the correct location?
No. That was the location. He's asking if we might be wrong about where Montasuka Canal was. I didn't mention this, but there was an archaeological dig here in Albemarle County in the 1920s, funded by the Smithsonian. And they found a lot of items. And in fact, I've written about this, I don't know how many different times, 2, 3, 4 different times. An early article, wasn't quite this one, for Albemarle magazine years and years ago, 20, 25, 30 years ago, I decided to go out on Polo Grounds Road. That's this location, the town and the mound. Well, no, the mound is on the southern bank of the Rivanna. The town was on the northern bank. I decided to drive down Polo Grounds Road and knock on all the private homes' doors to see if anybody had done anything. And so, like the third or fourth time, I hit this guy and he goes, "Oh yeah, my brother found tons of stuff that he dug up in our backyard." And I thought, oh my gosh, I've hit pay dirt. And I go, "Where's your brother? Where's this stuff?" "Oh, he took everything to Florida." What a bummer. Yeah, all the way in the back.
Yes, sir. Are there mounds on Bear Mountain?
What's that?
Are there mounds on Bear Mountain?
In Amherst County? I don't think there are mounds on Bear Mountain. Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, behind her, yeah.
I'm curious. He responded to the first question with charts and data, and the second one about the mounds, he chose to dig. And I'm just curious, like, what was there anything else other than just this kind of natural curiosity? Was there anything else kind of happening around him or that he was experiencing that made him choose to dig?
That's a really good question. No, I think Jefferson was one of the most curious presidents we've ever had. And he's just always curious. I mean, his intellectual curiosity knew no bounds. In fact, you read a biography of Jefferson, you wonder, when did this guy sleep? He's always doing. In fact, he wrote one of his granddaughters, who I think was only 8 years old at the time. It's wonderful how much may be done if we are always doing. So his it's curiosity, and he's thinking to himself, and this is my idea now, this is my theory. He's thinking to himself, well, I can write about this mound, but here's the time to excavate this mound and send even more information to the French. Yeah.
Can I get some clarification? You mentioned early on that.
Can you speak up, sir?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I need some clarification. You mentioned early on that the Sioux came across the Piedmont into Virginia.
The Sioux did, yeah.
Yeah, from the Ohio River Valley.
Right.
And when they arrived here, how were they renamed the Monacan? They came over as Sioux.
That's a really good question, but did everybody hear that? How were they renamed the Monacan? Well, I don't know a whole lot about Native Americans, but once you study them, you realize you come across, there's a big difference between tribes and nations. So within the Sioux Nation, there are all kinds of tribes. And I don't think we should assume that whites named the Monacan. Whites attempted to use the name they used for themselves. But like, for example, in Tidewater, Virginia, almost all the rivers and streams down there are named for different Powhatan tribes. So you have the Potomac, the Potomac, you have the Rappahannock, the Appomattox, the Chickahominy. One of the reasons, and an early writer on Albemarle County came up with this point of view, and I think this is pretty accurate. One of the reasons we don't have those names here in the Piedmont is because the Indians had already removed away from the Piedmont when the whites arrived. Down there was a time of, in the Tidewater, there was a time of mutual occupation. It's a big difference. Yeah.
In Professor Hammond's book, Monacan Millennium.
Yeah, I've got that book. Yeah, great book.
He talks about the Monacans, many of them being herded north up into Canada,
right,
for a forced migration. But then a number of them that were smaller groups that had moved south and documented south of Lynchburg, and then that
right
the families
into Southwest Virginia. Yeah.
Southwest. And then the families that remained, the 29 Monacan families were sort of in Amherst, and they just sort of remained there.
Right.
And that was sort of, there was the renaming.
Okay, so are you saying that? Thank you. So are you saying that when they say they've always been here, they mean Amherst County, and not necessarily Albemarle?
Yeah, they had moved to.
That's a good point. If I understand correctly, a number of them also went to upstate New York
Yes, and then.
and
eventually
became
moved.
associated with the, what is it, 5 Nations? There's a real sad aspect to that story. During the American Revolution, unfortunately, those people in upstate New York sided with the British. They chose the wrong side. And so General Washington sent Major General John Sullivan and a small army to wipe them out. And 40 villages were burned up there during the American Revolution. Just destroyed. Yep. Yep.
They've really moved a lot around, a lot like you said, because they can trace their language up to tribes that are on the Canadian border.
That's great. That's great. Did everybody hear what she said? They moved around a lot because they can trace their language to the Canadian border. Early examples of their language. Yeah. Hey, Peggy.
It was always my understanding that Jefferson is not considered the father of modern archaeology. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because of the dig, that he noticed the different colors of change of the soil, and he came up with mysterious
Stratigraphy. Right. But notice the way I said it. He became known. So for a while he was known. He's not considered anymore, but for a while he was known as the father of American archaeology. He was. Just as he's the father, one of the fathers of North American vertebrate paleontology. Right. Yeah.
The photograph or of the picture that accompanied this
Yeah.
lecture, how long ago was that done?
So, I don't know if you, I guess everybody saw it if you registered.
Yeah.
That painting, a really great painting, but it's of a dig that took place in the 1840s, so it's much later. If you see the clothing, the enslaved people, and it looks like a white overseer, if you look at the clothing they're wearing, it's obviously from a later period.
And it was a different mound in that picture?
Oh yeah, totally different mound, 1840s.
Okay.
Yeah,
Somewhere else, not even.
somewhere else, not even, no. But it's a great painting. Yeah.
How many white people were in Albemarle along about the time Jefferson was 40 doing this dig?
How many people were in Albemarle around the time that Jefferson was 40 and doing this big dig? There were about 5,000 people in the county.
5,000 white people.
5,000 white people. No, 5,000 people. So that's whites and enslaved African Americans. 5,000 people. Town of Charlottesville was maybe a couple hundred people. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's curious that he found a number of body parts mixed, as if, as you said, they were secondary burials. And it makes you wonder whether the mound was, I can't imagine the Indians toting body parts around as they moved. Maybe the mound was washed out and pieces collected and reburied?
That's an interesting question. He's wondering if, because of the commingling of the body parts, if the mound had been washed out a previous time.
Or even multiple times.
I guess that's a possibility. They tell us, Hantman and the anthropology department, they tell us that the level of the ground and the floodplain there is about 3 or 4 feet higher than it would have been at this time. Yeah.
I also wonder, when you talked about the naming of the rivers, because the Native Americans were still on the eastern shore, but by the time the Europeans got here,
No, not Eastern Shore, Tidewater.
Tidewater, and by the time the Europeans started to settle here, the decimation of Indian communities by disease. I mean, you could imagine 1,000 people in the mound, you know?
Yeah.
There was
Oh,
huge
yeah.
amount
Oh,
of
yeah.
Native Americans.
Yeah. Yes.
Considering how meticulous Jefferson was of the cataloging of his personal effects, like paintings, like his stock,
Library.
all this kind of stuff, how do you account for the discrepancy of him undertaking this massive
And not telling us when it was.
and not cataloging and owning the artifacts and possibly even selling them or writing them down on paper?
Wow, that's a really great question. Maybe, all right, I'm just supposing now, maybe owning human remains was a bridge too far for Thomas Jefferson. I know it would be for the average American. That's just a step too far. Yeah?
Rick, what was the date of the dig?
The date of the dig was the late summer or fall of 1783.
He had a lot of other things on his mind right then.
Well,
Like the death of his wife.
The death of his wife, the previous
getting
year.
ready to leave.
Death of his wife the previous year.
Yeah.
Previous year,
But he was-
getting ready to leave. Yeah.
Getting ready to leave.
He'd already been offered the position of American minister. He didn't take it, so he waited another year or so. Isn't that right, Peggy? Yeah.
Well, he accepted, yeah, in 83.
83 or 84?
He got his commission, but as peace commissioner, and then they.
Yeah, he turned down peace
commission.
yeah, right.
And they left in 84.
Yeah,
As minister.
84, yeah. Now, that's interesting that you would say that, is that not a lot of people know this, but Jefferson didn't go across the Atlantic as minister plenipotentiary to France. He went across the Atlantic as an agricultural negotiator, and that was because we already had a minister plenipotentiary in France, Benjamin Franklin. And it was when Franklin decided that it was time for him to come home that Jefferson was promoted and became American Minister Plenipotentiary. Yeah. Which is a fancy word that just means all powerful. Like the great and glorious Oz. Yeah.
Who directed the 1840 dig?
Oh, I have no idea about I know nothing about that 1840 dig. It's just a nice picture. It's a great picture.
But we don't know. I mean, is there?
We could look it up. I don't know anything about that 1840 dig. Yeah. You stumped. You got me.
That was my plan.
I kind of figured. Any other question? Yeah.
Were there any other folks in Virginia in that era, before that 1840, whatever that was?
That wasn't even Virginia. So forget about that painting.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry Sterling used that painting, but he asked me for a great image, and I think it's a great image.
Was there anybody else besides Jefferson who did any excavation of mounds? Because there were so many in Virginia.
There were. Later on they did. That's why Jefferson for a while was the founder of American archaeology.
He was the first, basically,
yes.
that we know of.
Yeah.
So between him and more times recent after that, was there anybody else that you know of?
I've just focused on Thomas Jefferson. So you two are together on that. You stumped me on that one.
But Rick, didn't you say that 1840? Didn't you say that wasn't?
Not in Virginia. Yeah, so forget about that painting. It's a great painting. Yeah. I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't hear you.
Do you ever give this lecture with other Monacan nations?
I gave this lecture one time where there was a good friend of the Monacan Indian nation, yes. And she challenged me on a number of points. And it was the reason I added that little aside about the controversy, thinking that perhaps someone here might also be interested in that controversy. Yeah.
Can I make a comment? So,
Sure. It's not about the painting, right?
No. Not at all. I have had the pleasure to visit the Monacan Nation down at Bear Mountain in Amherst County. And I'm wondering, when you were saying earlier about whether or not they were here, their word for here might...
Exactly.
We might be thinking here means, Alabama.
Yeah, this
They
is
might
the
be
same
thinking
point
here is
this...
Piedmont, like we've always been here.
Yeah,
in the
this is the
Piedmont.
same point this gentleman back here made. And that's a great point.
And what they've asked us, as
We can't hear it. What is the point being made?
so all I'm saying is, if you want to learn more about these folks, go to Bear Mountain, because they would love to have you come there and talk with them, and they will tell you who they are, where they come from, and where they are now.
Where is that?
It's down
In Amherst County.
There's a museum there.
South of Albemarle
It's called
County.
Bear Mountain, and there is a website, the Monacan Nation, you can find it online, so. I just would encourage everyone who have an opportunity to go for a tour.
Are we still doing okay?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, this lady here has a question.
I was gonna say, I don't think you can go there, you have to have an invite, right?
It's a museum, they do have hours, but if you want a tour, like if you wanna go with a little group or something, you could go. Make an appointment for the tour.
Any other questions?
Where's the painting?
Anybody else have a question or comment not about the painting? Thanks for coming, everybody.